Well, that's, I think, maybe a good place to start because I'm just curious on this too. I mean, I think from where we've talked, obviously with what you're doing with Swim Club, but I really kind of want to get an overview of kind of like what makes you tick, who you are.
Yeah,
You've had this great background, incredible experience, and now it really seems like, at least for me, it kind of looks like you're bringing together like personal passion and
yeah,
professional expertise, at a different level of your life right now. If
totally.
that's accurate.
I mean, you're like that's like wizardry at its best because you sort of summed it up very well. This is clearly not your first rodeo. That's exactly right. It's funny. So maybe I'll just rewind a little bit. I sort of talk about Squared Circles as my third act, if you will. Right. I started my career in consulting and finance, and very quickly realized that like I just professional services was great. I think it's an incredible training exercise for a lot of people, and you learn to do a lot of things well. But you know, had moved to New York, in 2003, done that for, like, almost 7 or 8 years, was at business school, literally when the subprime crisis was happening, thought I wanted to be in investment banking and very quickly realized that that was just, like, a pure glutton for pain, but just a tremendous sort of learning ground. Then '09, 10, this is when New York started to become sort of Silicon Alley, I guess that they now affectionately term it, right? And it was the rise of all things direct to consumer. And I got in touch with a friend of mine. Actually, funny enough, you know him well. Mark Hodlik is really the catalyst for my entrepreneurial journey. So he and I were in consulting together, and he reached out to me and said, "Look, I have this buddy I live with across the hall from. He's an auctioneer at Phillips Superi, and I think you should talk to him because he's always wanted to start his own thing, and he just doesn't know how to figure it out." So sat down with Alexander, who fast forward has now been my business partner for almost 15 years. And he was like, man, like I take these day auctions at Phillips and there's like no one in the room and all the bids come in by phone and email, this, that, and the other. I just don't understand why we can buy $50,000 cars online, but we can't sell art and collectibles online. And so that started a journey for a business called Paddle 8, which we built into one of the largest online auction houses for art design and collectibles. Tremendous journey, right? We did everything right and we did everything wrong. We sold the business in 2015. The sale was a complete disaster. It was a 200 million plus revenue business at the time. We bought it back, we rebuilt it, and then we sold it to a private equity firm in 2017. And in 2017, I kind of looked at him and he looked at me and it was like an old married couple. He's like, "I'll see you when I see you. Like, I've had enough of you at this point in time. Like, you do your thing, I'll do my thing." And I took a pause. And so this is where like the third act starts because I went into this monastery of like, I felt like I'd spent a decade building a single thing, sort of contextualize. We launched like 6 months after Instagram launched, right? So like the things that we take for granted now about digital marketing, performance marketing, right? Like the books were being written back then for what it was. And like I said, we did all the things right or wrong, but I had always been fascinated by this idea of a venture studio and the notion of like, if you believe that you know how to do some things better than the average entrepreneur because you've been through it once, can you create the infrastructure and a process to do it in a somewhat more scalable format? And by the way, scratch multiple itches at the same time versus just one itch. And so, like, the first evolution of that was really, well, let's go figure out, which studios are doing it right, which studios are not doing it right, whatever the case may be. And so I spent a bunch of time talking to different founders, different venture studios. I was an EIR at Human Ventures in New York. I was an EIR with Redesign Health. I was an EIR at Nike Valiant Labs, helping them think about. So really, you think about Human Ventures from like EIR from a fund standpoint, corporate innovation standpoint, and then Redesign as like a studio standpoint. And so it gave me this full view of like what was happening. And I came to the conclusion that like this is literally when you know I started thinking about venture studios was when obviously software and enterprise and now obviously AI has become all the rage. And there's like no denying that all of it will create outsized economic and social outcomes. But the way I talk about it is that all of a sudden you just had this like gap in the market, which we've all seen in consumer, where everyone was zigging. And I was like, no one's zagging to think about building really a studio for consumer. And the joke that I had at the time was that like I didn't think that the world just needed another better for you peanut butter cup, right? Like the idea was like, how are we going to build consumer products that actually have some sort of brand resonance, cultural resonance, and more importantly, cultural resonance, right? Like these things need to exit, they need to create, outsized outcomes and so on and so forth. And so the realization was that science would be the unlock, right? And so we are not scientists at Squared Circles, we just play them on Zoom. But the reality is we like to go find folks who have great pieces of IP or formulations or novelty in what they build and be their cultural translators, right? So if we can build products around science, that gives us the ability to attract differentiated behaviors in consumer adoption. It allows us to have competitive advantages, allows us to hopefully create outside exits because it's more interesting to acquirers. And that was the mission. I repartnered with Alexander, and we found I had a third co-founder, Lucas, who came from the brand world, who sort of does more of our go-to-market. And we defined ourselves as the Squared Circle's mission was to turn science into culture. And really, at the next level of that, science really meant one of three things. It was either you have a unique piece of IP, or you have a unique way of delivering something, formulation, efficacy, et cetera, or it was clean innovation, right? Which is obviously still very relevant, which is, can I just give you what it is better? But no matter what the case may be, the experience that I delivered you had to be better than the incumbent product, right? Because I'm not going to pay more for science or innovation if it doesn't actually do more, or doesn't feel better, or doesn't have a great brand experience wrapper to it. And so we set off. And to sort of bring it full circle to your point about passion, to this day, there's like hundreds of ideas on our like mood boards, right? But the ones that make it through to sort of having some sort of life are always those that are underpinned in something personal and passionate to us. Whether it's personal passion because we went through some sort of a situation ourselves, or we're enthusiasts of a personal idea, or we have friends and peers who are talking about something. And I think it's not surprising now when I look back, and we've launched 5 companies so far, but it's true, right? Like even at a very basic, if you were building one startup, it always starts from an idea of what are you passionate about and where do you see the opportunity? Because you're going to be right or wrong about the business opportunity, but the ability to want to push forward and build something, scale it, hire the team, invest the resources, it's got to be coming out of some sort of hunger. And so all 5 of them that we have today, we can go through them separately, are in some shape or form always born out of something that was near and dear to our hearts. So that was the plan. We raised a seed round in 23. We did a Series A with a growth round with L Catterton, who are just tremendous partners and share our perspective of building great consumer brands in 2024. The goal is just we're set up like a holding company. We can build these things, and hold them for as long as we want. But the goal is 1 to 2 businesses a year, all in health and wellness for the most part. And of course, we've done some beauty and skincare, but now we're sort of going into vitamins and supplements. We'll probably think about devices and stuff like that in the future. But let me pause there.
No, I appreciate it. I'm gonna very, very kind of just general. How old are you right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm 45.
Okay.
I'm turning 45 in exactly 2 weeks. So
When's
44 in
your birthday?
10 months,
When's your birthday exactly?
December 20th.
Okay, I'm the 23rd. Little difference. So I'm turning 53 on the
Okay.
23rd.
Yeah.
And married?
Married, 1 kid. I have a 16-month-old son. That's our first. And yeah, it's super exciting.
So I want to get into that. 16-month-old, 45 years old, also family getting. But I also want to just cut back a minute because where you started also was like this is like the third time I've heard this week from a former investment banker, somebody who's gone through, became an investment banker, talk about the pain, going into, and then also the get out. At some
Yep.
point, it seems like, okay, now I want to go do something I really like to do in a way or be
Totally.
passionate about it.
Yeah.
I want to, if you'll talk a little bit about, I think that gravitational pull in a lot of ways for a lot of guys into
Sure.
investment banking. Were you chasing salary, chasing money, chasing title, chasing in there, and then like what that grind is really like? And then, I look at this, you talked about the chapters, chapter one. I'm like, okay, I think there's even a chapters within this. Like, I want this, then I go and get it. Then I don't necessarily think I want it anymore or want it
Yeah.
like this, or maybe I've made enough to transition and get out. I think that's a big thing for men, even young men, as well as men in midlife kind of hit it again,
Yeah.
where I'm in this. Can I stay in this? Do I want to get out of this? Can I afford to get out of this? What do I
Totally.
do if I get out of it? Like
Yeah.
that to me has a lot. And I just feel like I hear that with a lot of investment bankers or former investment bankers who've gone on to different things. I never went into that, so I don't know. I can barely count. I think that's what it is. You have to be good with numbers. It doesn't, I don't know. Yeah, because I never went there.
It's a fascinating point. Like, I do say this though. I think investment banking, quality, like top tier consulting, et cetera, they are incredible training grounds for a finite set of skills, right? Like you learn to work hard, precision to detail, right? You can like sort of talk your way out of a circle on any topic because you have to get smart quick, et cetera. These are valuable life lessons. I think the thing for me is that like I've always had this itch where it's like, it's not like I'm a nonconformist, but I've just always wanted to like challenge the why, right? Or ask the hard questions, or I'm like, I don't really want to do it this way. I want to do it that way. I mean, if you've ever been around any professional services in early parts of your career, no one wants you doing that. The goal is do the thing you're told to do and do it well and do it better than anybody else, and that's great, right? And I wrestled with that. And like I wrestled with like on a Friday night, like being asked to like do some work because someone thought they had a musing about an idea or a topic that they wanted to come back on Monday morning and think about. But for me, it meant like a whole weekend of stuff. And by the way, now we have AI, so like this is probably less relevant. But I was just like, I don't get it. Like, why can't we solve this way? Or why can't we think about doing it this way? Right. And like, I just went through these like existential crises about why we're spending the time we're going to do it. And I was like, at the end of the day, at some point, whether the answers are right or wrong, I'd rather do it for myself. Right. And somehow or the way I will figure this out. And I say this to this day, I didn't know my ass from a hole in the ground about art, right? Or even art galleries or selling art online, but I knew myself that this was like, if this was the wedge to go bet on myself, I'll figure it out. Right. And if it wasn't that wedge, it was going to be some other wedge. But just very quickly, I just realized that like this was not going to be the way I was ever going to be happy. And by the way, fast forward 20 plus years, entrepreneurship is volatile, right? My peers who stayed in finance and consulting had very lucrative careers at the end of that 20-year journey, right? So we always talk about that when we catch up, which is like theirs was this and mine was this, right? But I wouldn't trade it for anything because at the end of the day, I think there's this element of like control of your own destiny.
When did you mentioned fun and happiness enter the picture?
I think it started entering the picture. You mean back then or in general?
Maybe both. And I guess the
Yeah.
question also kind of is around like, okay, I think there is this period of life where, okay, you're going to have to get serious and you're going to have to hustle and grind, and we're going to sacrifice probably some fun in there and ultimately
Yeah.
there. And I think that crossroads that you also talked about, do I stay on this path in 20 something years? Like, the line is going to look much more linear if I just
Yeah.
stay here and I do this.
Totally.
Okay. There's measurable, quantifiable outcomes. There's a path. I can see that. But if I get
Yeah.
off that path, I'm going to be on this volatile entrepreneurial roller coaster. Could have a bigger outcome. Could have a crash and burn. Could have multiple of both. In a way, we've seen that in there. And kind of which path do I want to take? And again, where does that fun and happiness start to trend in?
Yeah.
Which I find interesting. Also, it's like, okay, did it change or challenge your notions of like family and when you
Yeah.
got involved in a relationship and married and now you're having children at 44, 45 years
Totally.
old?
Yeah.
These like things are really, really interesting points.
I think I had maybe I'll give you a slightly different perspective on the same question. I think I saw entrepreneurship as a path to better control my own time, and whether the control of that time meant I worked 90 hours or it meant I could screw off for a weekend and take time off to do something fun, the outcome was going to be I controlled whatever the narrative was, right? I wasn't beholden. And of course, look, when you have co-founders and peers or a board, like you do things within bounds of reason, but there's a sense of like I dictate how and when I'm going to do something. And so, I was very fortunate in the Paddle 8 days, my first journey, fun and work were inextricably linked, right? Like you're going to Art Basel and you're going to galleries, and at the same time you're working 100 hours a week, and that was great. But I think in every subsequent reason why I've stayed in entrepreneurship is because I think you influence your outcomes however you do it, right? You are in control of when you want to work, how you want to work, et cetera. And by the way, those norms have now been challenged to your point as I've had a partner because I've always said like I can work whenever I want. I like to work all the time and I'll fit fun into work, et cetera. And she's like, well, that's if you're working on vacation, that's not really vacation for me. So like I get you enjoy that. That's great, but that's not like and so I think for I got married in 22. And so I think, pre-COVID, fun and work were just sort of like a fluid concept for me. It was just like, I'm going to work as hard as I want. I need to make money. And if I need to weave in work, I do my own thing, right? I'm my own boss. We have a team, but I don't have any other obligations, right? There's no child, there's no spouse, there's no nothing. I think once I got married, I think it was like step function change. When I got married, there was one reassessment of those things, and when I had a child, there was like a great reckoning of all those things. And I think the reckoning was, again, I'm in control of where we live and how we live and what we do and what we do. But the allocation of time, my priorities just shifted, right? And when I got married, it was everything I'm doing now is to create something for my partner and for us to have a good life. And then when I had a child, it was like, well, now everything is to do for them. And so fun can take a back seat because I want to do more time with my son over the weekend, or I need to carve out time for a family vacation, not something else, etc.
What does a good life look like to you?
I think a good life is where I could spend an equal amount of time, whichever time you want to define week, month, year, quarter, on friendships, family, extended family, and personal family, right? Because I think those are the 3 things, and I'm taking sort of like earning wealth and money as like we can all figure out how to make the right amount of money for whatever it is. You just have to adjust your expectations of what you want out of life depending on how much money you want. But I think when you have a finite number of hours, what I'm always wrestling with is like, what is the allocation across those 3 buckets, right? Am I staying in touch with right friends who've been there all along and seeing them or not? Am I giving enough time to my son and my wife? And am I spending enough time with my parents who are getting older, right? And my brother who, are we close enough? Are we not close enough? Do I see my nephews, et cetera? And so, like, of course, my priority is the family that I'm building, but the other 2 have very important impacts on my life. And so, if I could if I could sort of blank canvas it, there'd be sort of this like beautiful seamless distribution across all 3. I'd be seeing just enough of my friends and my family, and we would be doing things. But I think at any given time, I feel like two of the 3 get disproportionate emphasis. Doing all 3 well seems very hard.
Do you have a system for it? One I talk about a lot, like, hey, can you run your life like you run your business to a certain extent? And I just got back from Atlanta. Speaking of Hodelick, I was down at Jesse's house. His partner Jesse Itzler,
Of course. Yeah.
mine, and we were talking all about planning and time, and it being the resource that you can't make any more of. In his case, he has 4 kids. He's married 17 years and multiple businesses. I think the point that you made around also, well, hey, how much money do you need? And depending upon how much money you need, you can reverse engineer back to these other things. If you don't want to fly private or you don't want to do that, it's a different thing. Whatever it is,
Yeah.
either in either direction. Do you have a system for it? Because I think all of these things are wealth. Like you said, it's a combination of time, finances, resources, and then how do I satisfy all of that?
I would love to say I had some perfect system for it. I would say every year there's like an incremental improvement on whatever system is there. I think there's sort of like 2 buckets of this. I think with immediate family, my wife and my son, last year for the first time we sat, and we were married for 3 years, right? So like I think we realized that like it's very easy for a year to go by and not be thoughtful about what we want to achieve as a couple. And so we committed that somewhere between the end of the previous year and the first week of the new year, we would sit down for 2 to 3 hours and write out what we wanted to achieve for the year. Financially, personal goals, date nights, like whatever it is. Just like make a smattering of all of it, and we'll have a fun night over it, have drinks, whatever, and then we'll just sort of bag it and tag it into something and stay on top of it, right? And so last year there was an apartment we were trying to buy, and we wanted to plan a minimum number of trips. We wanted to go home to see my parents in Pakistan with our newborn, which is a huge commitment of time, and et cetera, et cetera. And so like we just made a list and we put it into various buckets, and we sort of commit to trying to achieve those things. I think what I found last year is as I did that, I really compromised on the bucket of, am I spending enough time with friends and thinking about my family? And so what I just did very simply is I made a list January of last year of 25 people I wanted to reconnect with, and it was 2 a month for every month. And I was just going to send them a note and be like, "Hey, I haven't spoken to you in a long time. Love to find time for 30 minutes to catch up." And it was anyone sort of like more than a year that had lapsed, right? Because like I've had this perspective that like we spend all this time and all these journeys and paths that cross, and then these things just fall by the wayside. Of course, sometimes not every relationship is meant to be cultivated, right? But I was reflecting on, I missed my 15-year business school reunion, and there's so many friends I hadn't seen in a long time, and then there was, like, professional networks, and I just said, "Look, I can't solve it all." So the easiest thing I'm gonna do is just make a list. Every year that list, and so I'm starting to think about the list for '26, and hopefully I'll go from there. And then the only other dimension was family, and I've had this perspective, is like, start with the easiest things. My parents and I grew up living very like, they lived abroad, I could see them very often, it was, like, once or twice a year, and because of that, you, like, neglect to call them, right? And, like, now they're in their 80s, you get to that point where like one day the phone is going to stop ringing, and we all know that, right? And so I just said very simply, I will call them. I will FaceTime with my son once a week, and I will call them at least once a week, right? And if I can increase the frequency, great. If not, but that's what we're going to do. And I've gone, 48 of 52 weeks doing that. And the goal next year is to make that 2 a week, right? And just, I'm trying to build these like intentional motivations. And so whether it's a system or not, I'm just trying to be more intentional as you sort of realize that the time is becoming finite.
Yep. Have you worked with anyone on this? You know, did this come to you kind of on your own? This this approach again, what I'm always fascinated by is how anybody does anything. Okay? Like,
Yeah.
okay, because a lot of what you're talking about too is curation. You know, curation of with this finite amount of time, I need to curate who I want in my life, how I want to go about doing things, which things I want to do. You know, and what you're describing, none of it is complicated or complex. If anything, it's simple, but like I say a lot all the time, simple isn't easy, and that's why most people
That's right.
don't do it. And the next thing is you wake up 5, 10 years later and you haven't spoken to the people you really wanted to. Find yourself here with a shorter amount of time ahead than potentially in a way, and you go, I don't want to miss this anymore or mess this up.
I've never worked properly with anyone. I have the benefit, so like a side thing that I do is I'm a CEO coach for a number of CEOs. Done it for almost 8 years. Very blessed to have worked with some tremendous CEOs. I think by proxy of looking at some of the best CEOs I've worked with, it's like a little bit of like osmosis of seeing how they think about their personal lives, because I think the ability to create that sort of healthy personal life accelerates your professional, obviously, right? And so a lot of these things, like this thing about the parents, was a tip from a friend of like one of the CEOs that I work with. And he was just like, we talked about it in one of our sessions where he saw this like widening gap between him and his parents. He was in his 50s and he realized that like they were in their late 80s and time was short and he just committed to it. And I just thought that's interesting, right? Like I take it for granted. Why not adopt it? It feels simple. And so I think for most of me, these things, even though my wife has said many times, she's like, you should work with a coach yourself and do something like that. I think a lot of my stuff has come more from peer to peer and just sort of seeing what's working for others and taking a bit from column A and a bit from column B and putting it together.
See, I like that a lot, and I appreciate that a lot. I mean, that's really look how I think I got started was I have questions, and I would like to ask those questions
Totally.
to a
Yeah.
whole cross section of peers, either guys I know, guys I don't know, whoever I could get out there that I think was ahead of where I was at the time.
I will say it is the hardest part though. I feel like guys don't talk to each other enough, which is the sole reason why I think you've been tremendously successful at what you do is I think coaxing that conversation, right? Like we don't share the most obvious things that are probably more centric to men in this age. And I guarantee we're all going through it, right?
I think that's accurate. I think a few things. I think one, for me, I never talked about that stuff. I wasn't taught or raised to ask for help or ask those kind of vulnerable type questions or anywhere where the guard comes down where you could be perceived as the weaker one or the one that doesn't know enough or so on and so forth. And I think a lot of guys feel that, okay, that they got to push that boulder uphill by themselves, especially if they have that entrepreneurial mindset and they're going out
Yep.
after that. So that's one thing where I was. The second thing was, well, how do I flip that? At least for me, was even what we're doing right now is like, oh, well, let me just bring a microphone. Bring a microphone, you turn on a camera, you turn on a recorder. Now there's this obligation and responsibility to ask good questions
That's
as
right.
a journalist or authority figure. What it really is
True.
very self-serving. And what I found, much like even coaching, even as you're describing what you're going through, I'm thinking about a client of mine who needs exactly what you just described because we've talked about it. And how do guys learn and absorb, I think, better? Third party endorsement, somebody who's
100%.
relatable, credible, aspirational, and go, like you said, I can take a little bit from Osman, I could take a little bit from Gray, I can apply this, but nobody talked at me. They kind of talked to me with
Completely.
me, or like heard it. So now I could listen to it on my own time where nobody knows I'm listening.
That's exactly
Nobody
right.
knows this is the
Yep.
piece that I'm really looking for. I can
Yep.
read it, listen to it. And I think that's the way men like really get it, really want to. At least for me, I find it very hard, like publicly, I find it very hard in sitting in circles, or forum type groups or anything like that type stuff. I find that very challenging. It's uncomfortable and I want to get better at it. But listening and doing these types of interviews and having these kinds of conversations and thinking about who might the next person be, or is this similar to what he said? And I like him and I like him and now I've heard it the third time. So now
Completely.
the 3 guys that I really like and respect, there's similarities amongst how they do things. I think that stuff stacks up and makes a huge difference.
I think the reference point thing is so spot on. I think we're all looking for like we want sort of like the validated endorsement from somebody else having done it. Again, like I could read it until the cows come home, right? I mean, it's like You could read about how to get ripped, or you could take a look at a buddy who's ripped and be like, "Fuck it, what is he doing?" Like, right? It's like, and I think that's the same for all these things, right? You watch somebody talk about what they did and then the impact that that had. It is so much more powerful than like, I don't know, seeing a random Instagram post or reading an article about it, right? And it's just
Well, I think now with a lot of that too, it's you know, everybody has a platform. It's so easy to have a platform
sure,
right now that
yeah,
cutting through the clutter and the noise of who's actually really credible and has actually done it versus who's just talking about it. You-
that's right.
If you haven't, as we get into some of the other, like if you haven't experienced infertility or trouble getting pregnant, you've never thought this about you, like you've never experienced that before. When you listen to somebody who has gone through it, now you can start to really think about it and those
So true.
multiple stories and then, okay, well, now what do they do about it? Okay, and how did this and is this guy like me, built like me, looks kinda like me, similar age as me, works as many hours as me? I think
Sure.
those
Yep.
things really matter when you line it up. It's like, if I'm asking a 25-year-old how he gets ripped, I'm asking the wrong guy the wrong fucking question. He stays in great shape and how he's been able to maintain that, that's what I'm looking towards.
That's exactly right. Because like the frame of reference on time is super important as well. Like where are you? What's happening in your life? Like I think you got to take it all, right? Into sort of consideration to really understand what makes somebody tick and do what they're going to do.
Yep, and that's what I do, like, I wanna make sure that those questions are asked too. It's like, "Okay, how old? Where do you live? How many hours you work? How many businesses you got? Okay, what do you" because then it sets the table around, "Okay, can I listen to this guy in a way?"
Yeah, totally.
There's a part of the population, okay, that's exactly like me. There might be some that goes, "Okay, he's I need somebody between where I am and where this guy."
That's
Some of
so
those things
true.
and
Exactly. Yeah.
looking at that, because some of these things seem like there's a lot of white space and gaps between. You gotta
Such a good point.
qualify and quantify these things.
That's a great point.
What are you most excited about right now?
What am I most excited about? I think personally, my son just started walking, and it's been like an incredible change in just the relationship that you have with him, that we have with him. Because, and I think it's like, people say like the next big step is like when they start talking, right? Which is like now they're communicating. But just this idea for him to like run around and he's like pointing at stuff that he wants and he's like mobile and he's the curiosity. It's like something really magical seeing it through their eyes because it's like everything is so exciting. And some days I feel like I'm like a jaded curmudgeon, right? And it's just like to be able to see that. So that's incredibly exciting. I think on the professional side, I think I'm really excited for it's not just one business. I think I'm truly excited that we are a small team of 6 people that have built 5+ businesses that are growing and scaling, and that we have an incredible pipeline of things that we're excited to bring to market. And we've done it at a time when, over the last couple of years, people haven't been that bullish on all things consumer and CPG and so on and so forth. And so it's tremendously, sort of rewarding to see that. And then I just think like it's less about an excitement. It's more so I think my wife and I are constantly asking ourselves, how do we support each other better to enable us to do what we do every day, right? She's a nurse practitioner. Her hours are crazy. And like, it's we have wild conversations. It's very hard to explain to sort of say like, woe is me, we didn't raise money when she's like doing critical care, at the hospital solving brain surgery problems. And so like understanding each other and having these more open communication has been phenomenal. It took us a while. I think when you get married late in life, you're both set in your own ways, right? In a lot of things. And like it takes time to unwind certain behaviors and practices. And I think we both looked at this past year and the year before that about how we're compromising better, how we're communicating better, how we're figuring out problems with our son better. And so I don't know, it's kind of amazing to see. We have enough problems ahead of us, I'm sure, but it's been amazing to see us just talk more, if that makes sense, and just sort of have this conversation about everything that's happening.
What is marriage and fatherhood in midlife look like? I mean, now I'm just asking a curious question. My boys
Yeah,
are 19
yeah,
and 22, as I said, I'm about to be
yeah,
53. And I would imagine, I don't really make assumptions, but that, a lot of your friends and like contemporaries, guys your own age, like, do you have a lot of friends that have 17-month-olds? Do you have a lot of friends that are
yeah,
newly married, or even divorced or remarried? Your timetable is a little different.
totally.
Was it intentional? Also.
I would love to tell you it was intentional. It was
And his dad was like, "Hey, if I would have found the person earlier, like, okay, or I
totally,
was
I would
working
have.
so hard, I woke up and I didn't realize it hasn't happened yet."
I will tell you one thing though. I think the intention to want to settle down was a real decision when I got to it. I got to this point. They all like, I lived in New York for almost 20 years, and now we've moved out. We split our time between Philadelphia and New York. But, it's easy to be single in New York, right? Because you always have friends who are single. It's easy to go out and date. It's easy to do all that sort of stuff. But I had this moment in time where, like, I think the circle had shrunk so far that you were like, "Oh, wow." Like, I think it's like, this is not healthy anymore. You don't wanna be the 40-something guy at the bar trying to pick up women. Like, I remember it vividly because it was late 18, early 19, and it was, "Let's go and let's be thoughtful about this." And the reason I say it was very intentional is because I tried the apps and they didn't work, and then I hired a matchmaker, and so, like, that's how I met my wife. And so the joke with the matchmaker is, though, is, like, she kept setting me up on dates that I refused to go on because they were terrible. It was, like, either they were, like, gold diggers or it was, like, completely outside the realm or whatever, and I finally said to her, I was like, "Look, I'm out. Just keep the money, like, I don't want any more dates. I'm good. This has not been worth my time." And she reached out to me, she was like, "Look, I have one more woman. I just go see her, meet her, and, like, if not, like, cut bait and do whatever you want." And that happened to be Lauren, turned out to be my wife, right? And so, like, but I think that's journey of, like, I'm going to commit the resources and time, much like I would to anything else, was very thoughtful and intentional. And so then we got married and it was COVID, right? Like, we dated for 6 months and then we went into COVID. And so there was, like, an accelerated, like, are we gonna make it or not? And we came out of that being like, if we survived each other in COVID, and it was hard because she had the one job where there was still work, right? Like, there was no work from home for healthcare workers. And so we had this, like, really intense courtship for a year, and I think at the end of it, we're like, "Yeah, we were meant to be together, and let's get married and do it." And so I think the first part of it was us getting to know each other. To your question about, like, fatherhood and marriage later in life, I think the hardest part was just that, the unwinding these like, one, we were learning about each other. I didn't know what a healthcare worker was like. She had no idea what the hell someone trying to build companies was like and what that meant, and all these different sort of professional attributes. And the second was just, yeah, we were used to being bachelorettes for our life. And now we're trying to, like, coexist and build a house together and a life together and so on and so forth. So that was hard. I think for parenthood, it wasn't actually, when we had our son, I feel like the hard part was not having the kid, because once they're there, you kind of have to do whatever you have to do to keep them alive. Like, they have their routine. Like, you got to feed them and they got to sleep, etc. I think the harder part was, like, she and I trying to figure out who's on first and what's on second. Right? And that system, like, we felt like for 4 years we had spent, like, to your point, we had a system, and now all of a sudden that system went up in smoke, right? And then we were rebuilding a new system of who's doing what when and how are we, you know, who's traveling and do we have help or do we not have help? We don't have parents nearby. And so all of that, I think, and they're sort of connected back to your question. I think the only reason it's harder now than maybe if it was in my 30s to a lot of my peers who had kids when they were younger is there's just, like, you're so much more entrenched in what you do, right? And just the nature of trying to unwind that now for raising somebody or doing something is harder, and it just changes. And by the way, you have a lot less energy too, And so I think it was those things. I think it was more us figuring it out as a couple, and I think it was personal energy, right? At 45, 44 versus in the 30s, that makes a big difference.
Well, now you mentioned energy a couple of times, and I love that word. And but earlier also, even as it pertains to marriage, you talked about okay, ready to settle down. Mm.
Yeah.
And I see these things like there's this term around like marriage, and family meaning like I'm ready to settle down, i.e., kind of slow down. And then you talk about energy in there too.
Yeah.
I don't see you slowing down. I don't see marriage and fatherhood being something that's in
No.
a way settling and anything. And then in there, in terms of having, less energy, if you will, as we get older, like what do we do to preserve and enhance energy? Things you're doing are like the opposite of settling down or
Sure. It's a
slowing down.
fantastic point.
So around that, I ask you like, okay, like what are you doing from an energy standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay. I am at this phase of my life right now where I'm operating and incubating and developing 5 different businesses.
Yeah.
I have been married for a certain window, a shorter window than maybe majority, at this
Totally.
stage. I'm only 17 months into this parenting thing. It does require a lot of energy. What do
I
you
think
do for that?
yeah. So, I think it's like, for me at least, it's like you find, like, energy conservation tactics versus like you think about where can I sort of get better at how I use my energy, right? And so like I'll give you a good example. I've always been a night owl, right? Like I can work hard and fast in the night and like it doesn't bother me at all. Because we had our son, I know he's gonna be up at 6:30 in the morning. Whether I like it or not, he is waking up like clockwork. Like there's one way I could say I'm just gonna burn it until whatever and then wake up at 5:30 or 6. The challenge with that is it's just gonna deplete my energy for everything else. So whether I like it or not, and my wife holds me to it, we try to be in bed by 9:30 or 10, right? Like shut down, lights are off, we're done. Because now that's my forcing mechanism to say he's gonna be up early no matter what, right? I'll give you another example. Like again, friends who had kids and now, right? I always used to wonder, like, and now I'm realizing it, like once they're moving around and you have activities and daycare and this, that, and the other, I was like, how the hell do you get shit done? And they were all said the same thing. They're like, you gotta get up early. Like if you don't get a bunch of stuff done before the day starts, you will not get stuff done. So what used to be go to sleep at 2 a.m., wake up at 10, right? And like rinse and repeat or some derivation thereof. Go to sleep at 10, wake up at 5, clear out the inbox before 6:30, see my right. And so like I think everyone's different. I think you find a way to channel the energy in more focused ways. So it's almost like these sprints to get you through the day in the right ways possible because trying to burn it across the board. And by the way, I'm the first guy to say this, like, I'm not like the super gym go-getter. I have my healthy routines. I sleep well, but like I'm not in like the best physical shape. So like I know myself well too. And like I'd love to do more of that stuff. But I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna focus on like my mental energy and make sure I could deliver 100% of what we gotta do. I'm always focused, I'm always caught up. And so it's been more about figuring out where and how I expend energy more than anything else, if I'm brutally honest.
I think that's a great point in there. I think that there's this notion that, and I've been talking about it a lot because I think there's a lot of guys in this over-indexing trap too that they fall into. I think there's a lot of guys that have kind of doing nothing is not the answer. You can't do
Totally.
nothing.
Yeah.
Like sitting back at this and doing, but then this over-indexing area where doing everything is also not the answer. This quest for optimization, and
Sure.
to do everything. Again, somewhere in the middle really is the sweet spot. And this notion of being optimal versus optimized, and certainly at different
Good point.
seasons
Yeah.
or times of our life where, the time to run the Ironman is probably not when you've got the 17-month, when you're doing running 5
True.
businesses, relatively newly married with a newborn at home, 17-month-old, probably not the ideal time to add one more extreme thing, on top in there. So this notion that you're describing, it resonates with me about optimal. Okay. Again, how much bandwidth do I have? What should I really be focusing on and prioritizing in terms of my health, my wellness, which is different from fitness. Like I know a lot of
Totally.
people that are
Yeah.
really fucking fit people in terms of if you want to just use that as the bar.
Yeah.
But in terms of their overall total life wellness, like disasters out
I
there.
will tell you the one other thing, it's the easiest thing to say, hardest thing to do, but it has made and I'm probably like a fraction of the way of doing it, but still getting better. I think if you could turn off your own noise, like I think we expend a lot of energy thinking about what else I could do, what others are doing, what others think of me, right? And like I love Philadelphia as a city. It's great, whatever. It's not New York, but there's something to be said about not being in the chaos all the time.
Mm.
And I think when you turn off the noise, maybe care a little bit less about what someone else thinks, maybe care a little less about what someone else is doing, less on social media, etc. Consciously or consciously, it's less depleting to the energy that you have, right?
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. I had written something down while you were talking before, and I'd circled it. It's like, what do I really care about? And what's the cost of doing it?
Yeah,
Like in there. Because as you were talking, okay, is that what we're really getting at? Like, if I can write down again those 26 names, if I can write down, okay, the trip I want to take, or the visit to see my family that I want to, or the type of business I want to run, or where that goes, like what do I really care about without, as you said, distraction or noise? Thinking about, I don't know, what the market thinks I should build as a company,
totally. Yeah,
or what LinkedIn says of how many contacts I should have that I don't really know half of, at
sure.
all.
Exactly.
The vibe in
Yeah,
there too, and then get into, okay, well, what's the cost of doing or not doing that?
yeah,
Meaning I
yeah.
could make a lot of, like, okay, like maybe I could make a lot more money, but the cost is I don't talk to 24 of the 26 people on that list.
That's right. That's exactly right.
At
Cost
some point, like
is
which one of
yeah,
these things are all, how do they start to balance out? Or maybe I should run 4 companies instead of 6 companies.
true. The edit is hard, right? Saying no, whatever you wanna call it. But, like, I think you used the word at the top of the call, curation. It's probably the hardest thing for any of us to do. We all know saying doing less is the new more, right? But it's to turn off the noise, to say no, to cull it out, it's hard, but I think those who can do more of it, I just think it preserves and gives you greater return on what you have left.
I think it reduces that notion of busyness
Yeah,
and gets you into
exactly right.
productivity because everyone answers the question, "Oh, yeah, how are you?" And they go, "Oh, I'm so busy." It's like, oh, well, there's no real prize in perpetual busyness. How
Yeah,
can we go back
yeah,
into to productivity? And coming to the end of the years, we're looking at these things, and I'm sure you're probably looking at your portfolio and
of course.
allocation of
Yeah.
investments and opportunities and all these things, as am I and my partners. And I'm going, okay, well, we did 52 interviews, if you will, this year.
Wow.
Okay, do we do 52 interviews next year?
Sure.
Are we better off doing 12 interviews, doing them all in person or doing them a
Yeah,
certain way? Like, what do we start to look at in terms of quality versus quantity, in terms of busyness versus productivity in all of these areas? Now I want to make a list of friends that I want to stay in contact with. And where does that fit with everything else
sure.
that's already going on? And to your point, everybody you meet and connect with, because I think by nature, like as entrepreneurs, like we're curious, we're inherently curious
Absolutely.
and want to hear stories and think of things, and then you start to think, "Oh, that could be something, that could be something."
That's
But you
right.
really can't do everything. Like you said, say yes to everything. Stay in contact with everybody that you do
Awesome.
after all. Very hard as much as you can have a great conversation. Sometimes it's just that, it's a great conversation. It was insightful, it was educational, it was a lot of fun, but that's what it is.
I think the challenge is being able to distinguish between the 2, right? Like, I always used to be in awe at folks who were just consummate networkers or had just, like, tremendous social capital. And then one part of it was, like, you realize who you are and who you're not. And the other is exactly as you said, you realize that, like, this was just meant to be a phase of my life or a conversation that need to happen, or it wasn't, like, authentically genuine and meant to extend it. But then for everything else, yeah, you just gotta, like, find to make the time, I think.
I do want to get to this because one of the reasons that we were reconnected again through Mark and we were years ago, and these things tend to happen, in this way, is because one of the companies and one of the projects that you're working on is Swim Club, and I know this one is personal again, also as well
Yeah,
as professional. We go back there. Fertility, male fertility in particular. We spend a lot of time as men trying to not get anybody pregnant.
that's right.
And I know that with 2 young men in my life now too,
Yeah,
and then we get to a certain point where we wanna become fathers and
yeah,
husbands, and for a lot of us, it's not that easy. If you'd share a little bit about your story and the incubation of, like, how this also went from your
sure.
experience into,
Yeah.
again, how you take situations, circumstances, and ideas and run with them too for the greater good, which is what really interested me also, and like, okay, that's important on so many levels.
No, happy to. My wife and I tried to conceive naturally. We were not successful. We tried for almost 18 months. And when we started, and it was both a combination of all of it, age, biological, et cetera. And a big part of it was also my swimmers were okay, but not great. And when we started IUI and IVF, there's sort of this like, I mean, for women, it is just like one of the most harrowing experiences between the injections and the hormones and the whole process is just excruciating. But then there's this other part of it, there's the emotional side of it, and then there's the other side of it, which is there's this huge cost associated with these procedures. And like some insurance covers it, some doesn't. But like, the average IVF can be upwards of $30,000, not including all the supplements and other things that women have to take prenatals and so on and so forth. And my wife, she, to her credit, had this point. She was like, look, if we're going to spend all this money, like, why would we take even the slightest risk with your sperm, right? Like, it should be like it is the easiest thing for you to do. And yes, like you should abstain from alcohol and eat better or whatever. But like we're going to spend all this time and money, it shouldn't be an area where we take a risk. And so we went down a bunch of different rabbit holes, bought some generic supplements here and there, bought some men's multivitamin. She bought a bunch of men's stuff from women's websites that would sell prenatals, etc. But ultimately, being in healthcare herself, went down sort of like these research holes of like looking at the clinical research, there's a seminal book that a lot of people who go through IVF read. It's called It Starts with an Egg. And Rebecca Fett has this whole chapter in it about what are the clinical doses of the key ingredients needed for optimal sperm health. And what you find is that there's like this huge mismatch, right, between what's sold and what the literature will say you need to affect sperm health. And so she would literally curate like packs of supplements on Amazon. It was brutally painful because every 2 weeks without fail, we'd sit down at the dining table and make these little pill packs. It was like omega-3 from this supplier and this from that supplier and whatever else, whatever. And it worked, right? Like over the course of 3 months, sperm count improved, motility improved, morphology improved. And it's sort of like it felt obvious because like the literature says you take this much amount of omega-3 and it's going to make a difference, right? And that's great, etc. But that was like step one. I think step two was I was, like, out, and I happened to be talking to a buddy whose wife was also going through IVF, and I was just like, "Yeah, man, it's kinda crazy, like, taking all these supplements to, improve my sperm," and it was like a light went off in his head. He was like, "You too?" And I was like, "Yeah," like, and it was like, "Why are we talking now? Why didn't we talk 3 months ago or 6 months ago?" And, like, it was just another reminder, and I think we've seen this in, like, erectile dysfunction and hair loss that, like, men don't talk about these topics because I think to your point earlier, like specific sperm health for a long time was associated with virility, right? And I think there's this like, how can we change this narrative about you're not less of a man if your sperm isn't great, right? But at the end of the day, you're trying to do whatever you can to have a kid, which is like the greatest thing you could do. So like, let's change that narrative, etc. And so I think the combination of those 2 things, one, I had seen hair loss, erectile dysfunction. We did a lot of work with a company called Nutrafol, right? Like what it meant to change these dialogues and narratives for men specifically when it comes to emotional health. And two, it just felt like the existing solutions, especially from a CPG standpoint, seemed to pale in comparison to what like the literature and the science would say, and that there just seemed to be a business idea there. And so pitched the idea to my business partners and we developed this like whole brand idea about like what's the modern day men's fertility brand look like. And of course, there's an opportunity as we talk about it to own men's health below the belt. Because if you can start with fertility, that same customer will need prostate health and testosterone and libido, right? And these are all interrelated because the testicles are all about sperm and testosterone. Of course, prostate health is, like adjacent. And the idea was just that, like, it to us felt like the third pillar of emotional health for men. Like there have been great companies that solved hair loss, and there have been great companies that solved erectile dysfunction. They took time, they took brand building, democratizing, eliminating the suffering in silence. And to us, this just felt like the last pillar. Like, why are we not talking about this as men? And so, it was very much we talked to friends and peers and women and men and couples and journeys all along the way. And Swim Club was born out of that. And of course, Steve and his wife had gone through something similar, and so we brought him on as the CEO to help us sort of get this business off the ground and scale it and run it. And it's been tremendous to see the outpouring since we launched it. Like we've had couples reach out and be like, women and men, which we find surprising, being like, "Can't believe this didn't exist. Like, thank you for tackling this. Like, we're going through IVF. Like, we've been looking everywhere for something that works." And so, it's early days and time will tell hopefully if the business is successful or not. But just knowing that the feelings that I had are now bearing themselves out through these testimonials we see, it's just been insanely rewarding. And so, yeah, super excited to put that out in the world.
Do you know, or my again assumption? I hate to totally make assumptions, but I think men and families are having children later in life. Yeah. And when I see kind of again with that, assumptions and kind of observe is that we're going to school longer, we're taking more time to develop their careers, get
Yep.
financially secure. Couples, families, individuals they're getting married later, they're having children later, so on and so forth. Is that well even accurate?
Hundred
You're not really the outlier. Way
Oh, in
back in
the
the
last
days, it's like our parents were in their 20s. I feel like it keeps getting older and later. I mean, and now I have buddies of mine that are now they have children in college effectively, and they're either remarried or having children again
Yeah,
because these are
crazy.
like really like vibrant, real men who have taken great care of themselves, in
Totally.
life, and they're actually in this second stage of their life, like almost having a secondary first stage, if that makes sense.
Wild. Reset. I mean, there's a ton of literature around this, but like just one stat. The average age that a man had kids in the United States 5 years ago was 31.2, and now it's 36 and a half, right? So almost 5 years increase. I haven't looked at it, but I bet you without even skipping a beat, that if you looked at those numbers in core metropolitan cities, I bet that range is even starker, right? Like LA, New York, like I bet it's golfed even farther, right? And so for all the reasons you just mentioned, it's 100% true. We're getting married later, we're trying to earn more, we're stressed out more, right? Like all of it together, environmental, physical, biological, it's putting a lot of stress, right, on fertility and sperm health without a doubt.
So that's a market.
It is. I mean, that's our bet. That's our bet, right? Like, obviously, nothing would make us. It's we always joke. It's a funny business where it's the one business where like LTV is like a false construct because it's like if you're successful, like you're churning out, right? But that's okay. Like, I think it's such a big problem to solve. We think the odds are continue to be stacked against us as men, right? As we get later in life, from like a pure health standpoint, and whether you're doing this or something else, like the whole bet here is we should be doing just as much as our sort of partner or spouse, right? Like they go through a ton. It's not a lot that we have to do in this whole ecosystem. And so, like, if there's any chance, your boys could be great. Like, why not still do it? Right? Go, why, even if it's like 1% chance, take it to improve because the downside, those hard questions you have to ask yourself or the emotional challenges the couples face when they can't get pregnant, it's a lot tougher. Right. And so it's just like anything else. We talk about all the time. It's like, you go to the gym for your health, you eat better for your right, like you sleep, like we do all these things and we spend all this money on these other things. This, they say you'll do anything for your kids, like it's just as much you'll do anything to have a kid. So,
How do you go about developing something like that? Like, how does your mind kind of in your process work? We talked about that a little bit earlier from
yeah,
like idea to execution when you go, hey, wait a minute. I've been experiencing something. Lauren and I have been talking about this. We're going through this. We're spending money. Like we're doing all this. Wait a minute. Okay. This is actually a problem that I would like to try to solve. And like you mentioned earlier, even with paddle, like, hey, this sounds like a viable business opportunity, but I don't know the first thing about art, an auction or
yeah,
anything at all.
totally.
But I will figure that out.
I think we've gotten, I mean, I'd love to give myself credit back in the Paddle 8 days, but we've gotten a little smarter as a studio about I think the hardest thing is not to drink your own Kool-Aid, right? And so we want to ensure that we're getting enough signals before we spin something up. So whenever we sort of have a concept, the innovation process is probably a little circular. The first thing we'll do is start. There's no substitute for actual consumer work, right? So talk to 20 guys, talk to 20 women, talk to 10 urologists, fertility experts, like what's missing in the market, why do you prescribe something, so it's as quickly and rapidly lightweight actual consumer research. But I'm not, yes, you can do surveys and stuff, but it's like these types of calls, right? We probably had, like I said, 20 plus calls with guys, 20 plus calls with women, partners, IVF, acute, passive, all that. And you sort of read the tea leaves, right? Like, are those pains similar? Are people elevating the same concerns? Do they think about the problem it's there or not? I think that establishes, like, is there a need and a pain to solve? If yes, let's figure out what the product is. Then we develop an MVP product and you sort of decide on what your product pillars are going to be. And for us, it was we're not going to compromise on quality. Everything has to be in the doses that exist in the clinical amounts, and it's got to be all in one stack. And the reason for that last one is that most of the things that you see sold, right? It's like there's a base stack and then you have to buy a booster or a filler or an add-on, right? Or like there's no omega-3 or there's no CoQ10. And what we find is that, like, when you do all those things, right, it's a premium product. So then we took that formulation and then you do more consumer testing, right? You establish the need and the price point, but what you didn't actually do was put real product in front of people. So now we're asking, would you pay for it? If you wouldn't pay for it, what's the most you would pay for it, right? Like,
Yeah.
should it be a supplement or should it be a different format? And so if we get through those three phases, we're sort of off to the races on the launch, right? And I think for us, in all three of those phases, when it came to Swim Club, we have very positive signals that gave us conviction to build here.
So what's next with this?
With Swim Club?
With swim club, with squared circle?
Oh yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
exciting. Look, with Swim Club, we're 3 months in. The biggest goal is we just want to make sure that we have product market fit, right? Like there's enough people buying at the price point that we have. We're getting positive reviews. It's the hardest thing about this product, right? Because there is a part of it which you could take it has nothing to do with the supplement, but it does you're still not successful. Right. And so we can't obviously, unfortunately, separate like, were you not successful because of this or something else, et cetera. But as long as there's enough people taking it and like sperm counts go up or people do get pregnant. Like I think we want to establish those positive signals before we keep putting more fuel on the fire. So that's the biggest goal for Swim Club over the next 2 or 3 months. And all the early signals tell us we're on track. But again, like it's early stage building, and I'm sure there's other things lurking around the corner that we'll learn as soon as we get there. Super excited. We're launching a women's menstrual health business called Amulet in January. So it's the tagline is something that's like I give credit to our team. It's called Innovation for the Better Half of Humanity. And so it's a lactoferrin and creatine product to help with cycle support. The whole premise is that women have 10, if that, good days a month. Why can't they have 30 good days? And so, how do we regulate what's happening in their bodies to give them real science delivered to sort of manage those symptoms and fluctuations? We have a GLP-1 nutritional business that's probably later in the year, in March or April, really to manage the side effects and symptoms of GLP-1. It's a ready to mix, probably format, protein, clear protein, electrolytes, etc. And then we have two concepts we're currently workshopping. One's in the children's oral care space, and then the other is probably in peptides, and thinking about something there for beauty and skincare. So, you know, probably again, two businesses this year, and we'll keep developing a couple more. And I think for us, it's quality, not quantity as a small team, and we make high conviction bets. So hopefully, as we keep researching things and develop more conviction, bring these things to market.
This brings me back to a question I wanted to ask you earlier, and I'm glad we came back here. Everything that you're describing brought me back to thinking about what you said about science, about being a company that is invested in science.
Yeah,
We're also at a time, at least I see it, where science is being questioned. Sometimes
totally.
science is being thrown out.
Yeah,
And noise is taking the place of science in a lot of ways. We're
yeah,
challenging or questioning science and who's trying to, who's out there stifling us and who's out there kind of, you know, embracing it and how much attention should we be paying to quote unquote what used to be challenging facts. Yeah, or I guess I don't want to go on a
totally.
whole soap
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
around the whole thing, but science is being challenged. I was on a big hike just the other day with a group of people, and it came out on the hike that, science is broken. And somebody else back there was like, I'm not going to engage in this conversation because, because no, like science is science. And science, like, I believe in science. And you guys are placing a big bet in science. I think at a time where, again, science is being challenged.
Yep.
And I think between noise, even between AI, being able to get incorrect information, I
So
think
true.
we are going to start seeing, I hope, the pendulum again swing back towards, hey, we've gone far and beyond questioning science into just like flat out falsehoods or not taking science seriously enough. And we need to come back into like the validity of science itself.
It's true. It's the hardest thing, honestly, to stay the course on because there are a lot of great brands and businesses built on the back of science washing versus true science, right? It's like perceived science.
Well,
The
give me a
word,
definition of science washing. I just learned a new term. Okay.
yeah, it's like I'll give you a great example. There are a million ways to say you're clinically formulated, right? And the minute you put that word clinical, it gives people the perception that it's backed by clinical studies or clinical rigor or whatever. The challenge is that there's no regulatory body to really challenge you on what that is. Like, you can't say clinically validated until you've actually run a clinical trial on your own thing. But clinically backed, clinically supported, like every freaking brand says that, right? And so you're leaving the work and the burden on the consumer to figure out, are there actual researches or have you done study? And more often than not, no. And so it's like it's only when you get to like a large enough size and scale that researchers or all sorts of people start to question what it is. But I think there's just so much of that right now where it's easy to throw up these like perceived underpins of science. And we talk about it all the time, which is like we will not take shortcuts to what we do, but it does make your education that much harder. Because if I'm looking at two brands that maybe look almost identical, right? And they kind of say the same thing, how do I tell you that this one costs 30% more and has more scientific rigor when the average attention span is de minimis, right? Ads, micro text, whatever else it is. And so I think we've signed ourselves up to, we understand there's going to be more education. We understand why we surround ourselves with advisors and experts, and we try to lend credibility to it, but it's hard. And I do think the pendulum will swing back as a lot of the brands that claim to be science forward get sort of called out for different things. But yeah, there's a lot of it out there.
You keep getting me to write stuff down as you're talking. Again, it goes back to I think a lot of this for me was core beliefs. core principles, standards that we want to live by, whether those are personal, professional, building a company in our own home. And again, I think they're the same. Ideally, I can't see myself living one way and operating
Sure.
another way. But what you're getting at is back to like, hey, what do we believe? What is our thesis? Where do we want to invest personally, professionally, our time, our energy, our health, the products, the things we put on our bodies, in our bodies, how we do all these things. And I think that that's, that now, and I love when this time of year kind of comes around for that because it's a chance to really evaluate what we believe in and what we stand for.
So true.
A chance to take a look back at what, how our years have gone. And you're 3 months in on one business, you're years in another business, you're years now as a parent, a husband. I think for all of us as husbands, fathers, providers, and whether we're entrepreneurs or not, or it's a chance to look at again what our value and our belief systems are, and get in there and do like I said, do your homework, do your research, and with the impetus being put on the consumer now or the individual more than ever to have to decipher all this, finding who you can trust and out there is vital. Who are you listening to out of all the noise and cutting through it, and then curating as we talked about before, hey, what do I want in my life? Who do I want in my life? All these things that you've touched on. So I really appreciate it because, like we said, I think this is to me, this is the way we learn. This is the way we get better.
But
Little
I agree.
pieces from different individuals, from different products, all of that out there, and then ultimately we bring it back into how does this really help me in what I do and how I do it, and then can I go and share that with other people too, and we keep paying that forward.
I love that. I'm so glad we had a chance to connect, obviously through swim club, but to be able to sort of share that journey and more. I think, like I said at the top, I think what you do, not just all these topics, I think is incredibly important, especially for this demographic, because we don't talk about it enough, and we all sort of need to kind of hear from each other to really make changes. So thank you, Greg.
No, I appreciate it. Look, we are in all this together. I love how these things come full circle overall and connection and just keep amplifying one another's messages and what we're trying to do out there, put good out there into the world. So we'll tag all of this obviously with where to find you, where to
Amazing.
find circles, where
Awesome.
to find Swim Club, the other brands and products that you're involved in. And I just appreciate hearing from you and sharing. So this has been great, my friend. Thanks.
Really, really looking forward to it. Thanks for taking the time, Greg. I know you got a lot going on, man. Really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch soon. Looking forward to it.
My pleasure.